Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continuing with Canto 7, Chapter 4, Text 44. Hiranyakasipu terrorizes the universe. Maharaj Yudhisthira said to Narada, "Oh, best of the saints among the demigods, oh, best of spiritual leaders, how did Hiranyakasipu give so much trouble to Prahlad Maharaj, the pure and exalted saint? Although Prahlad was his own son, I wish to know all about this subject from you." Purport: to know about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the characteristics of his pure devotee, one must inquire from authorities like Devarshi Narada. One cannot inquire about transcendental subject matter from a layman. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 3:25-25, Satam prasangan mama virya sambidho bhavanti ritkarna rasayana katha. Only by association with devotees can one authoritatively understand the position of the Lord and his devotees. A devotee like Narada Muni is addressed as Suvrata. Su means good, and vrata means vow. Thus the word suvrata refers to a person who has nothing to do with the material world, which is always bad. One cannot understand anything spiritual from a materialistic scholar puffed up with academic knowledge. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 18:55, Bhaktyamam abhijanati. One must try to understand Krishna by devotional service and from a devotee. Therefore, Yudhisthira Maharaj was quite right in wanting to learn further about Prahlad Maharaj from Sri Narada Muni. There are just two more verses with no purports in verses, the text 45-46. So this is Yudhisthira continuing to ask Narada, a father and mother are always affectionate to their children. When the children are disobedient, the parents chastise them, not due to enmity, but for the child's instruction and welfare. How did Hiranyakasipu, the father of Prahlad Maharaj, chastise such a noble son? This is what I'm eager to know. How is it possible for a father to be so violent toward an exalted son who is obedient, well-behaved, and respectful to his father? O Brahmana, O Master, I've never heard of such a contradiction as an affectionate father's punishing his noble son with the intention of killing him. Kindly dissipate our doubts in this regard. And the short purport: in the history of human society, an affectionate father is rarely found to chastise a noble and devoted son. Therefore, Maharaj Yudhisthira wanted Narada Muni to dissipate his doubt. End of chapter 4, beginning of chapter 5. Prahlad Maharaj, the saintly son of Hiranyakasipu. And the chapter summary. Prahlad Maharaj did not carry out the orders of his teachers, for he was always engaged in worshipping Lord Vishnu. As described in this chapter, Hiranyakasipu tried to kill Prahlad Maharaj, even by having a snake bite him and by putting him under the feet of elephants, yet he was unsuccessful. Paragraph. Hiranyakasipu's spiritual master, Shukracharya, had two sons named Shanda and Amarka, to whom Prahlad Maharaj was entrusted for education. Although the teachers tried to educate the boy, Prahlad, in politics, economics, and other material activities, he did not care for their instructions. Instead, he continued to be a pure devotee. Prahlad Maharaj never liked the idea of discriminating between one's friends and enemies. Because he was spiritually inclined, he was equal toward everyone. Paragraph. Once upon a time, Hiranyakasipu inquired from his son what the best thing was that he had learned from his teachers. Prahlad Maharaj replied that a man engrossed in the material consciousness of duality, thinking, this is mine and that belongs to my enemy, should give up his household life and go to the forest and worship the Supreme Lord. Best thing. When Hiranyakasipu heard from his son about devotional service, he decided the small boy had been polluted by some friend in school. Thus, he advised the teachers to take care of the boy so that he would not become a Krishna-conscious devotee. However, when the teachers inquired from Prahlad Maharaj why he was going against their teachings, Prahlad Maharaj taught the teachers that the mentality of ownership is false, and that he was therefore trying to become an unalloyed devotee of Lord Vishnu. The teachers, being very angry at this answer, chastised and threatened the boy with many fearful conditions. They taught him to the best of their ability and then brought him before his father. Paragraph. Hiranyakasipu affectionately took his son, Prahlad, on his lap and then inquired from him what the best thing was that he had learned from his teachers. Same question. As usual, Prahlad Maharaj began praising the 9 processes of devotional service, such as Shravanam and Kirtanam. Thus, the king of the demons, Hiranyakasipu, being extremely angry, chastised the teachers Shanda and Amarka for having wrongly trained Prahlad Maharaj. The so-called teachers informed the king that Prahlad Maharaj was automatically a devotee and did not listen to their instructions. When they proved themselves innocent, Hiranyakasipu inquired from Prahlad where he learned Vishnu Bhakti. Prahlad Maharaj replied that those who are attached to family life do not develop Krishna consciousness, either personally or collectively. He hasn't answered his question, but he says, such people won't understand. Even if I told you, you wouldn't understand. Matirna Krishna Paratak Svutova. Instead, they suffer repeated birth and death in this material world and continue simply chewing the chewed. Prahlad Maharaj explained that the duty of every man is to take shelter of a pure devotee and thus become eligible to understand Krishna consciousness. Final paragraph. Enraged at this answer, Hiranyakasipu threw Prahlad Maharaj from his lap. Since Prahlad was so treacherous that he had become a devotee of Vishnu who had killed his uncle Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakasipu asked his assistants to kill him. The assistants of Hiranyakasipu struck Prahlad with sharp weapons, threw him under the feet of elephants, subjected him to hellish condition, threw him off from the peak of a mountain, and tried to kill him in thousands of other ways, but they were unsuccessful. Hiranyakasipu therefore became increasingly afraid of his son Prahlad Maharaj and arrested him. The sons of Hiranyakasipu's spiritual master, Shukracharya, began teaching Prahlad in their own way, but Prahlad Maharaj did not accept their instructions. While the teachers were absent from the classroom, Prahlad Maharaj began to preach Krishna consciousness in the school, and by his instructions, all his class friends, the sons of demons, became devotees like him. Text number 1 from chapter 5. The great Saint Narada Muni said, the demons, headed by Hiranyakasipu, accepted Shukracharya as their priest for ritualistic ceremonies. Shukracharya's 2 sons, Shanda and Amarka, lived near Hiranyakashipu's palace. Purport. The beginning of the life story of Prahlad Maharaj is recounted as follows. Shukracharya became the priest of the atheists, especially Hiranyakashipu, and thus his 2 sons. Shanda, and thus his 2 sons. Prahlad had more than one brother, but here it says 2 sons. Oh, Shanda and Amarka resided near. Okay, so it's the 2 sons are making reference to Shukracharya. His 2 sons, Shanda and Amarka, resided near Hiranyakashipu's residence. Shukracharya should not have become the priest of Hiranyakashipu because Hiranyakashipu and his followers were all atheists. A Brahmana should become the priest of a person interested in advancement in spiritual culture. The very name Shukra Acharya, however, indicates a person interested in obtaining benefits for his sons and descendants, regardless of how the money comes. A real Brahmana would not become a priest for atheistic men. Text 2. Prahlad Maharaj was already educated in devotional life, but when his father sent him to those 2 sons of Shukracharya to be educated, they accepted him at their school along with the other sons of the Asuras. Text 3. Prahlad certainly heard and recited the topics of politics and economics taught by the teachers, but he understood that political philosophy involves considering someone as a friend and someone as an enemy, and thus he did not like it. Purport. Politics involves accepting one group of men as enemies and another group as friends. Everything in politics is based on this philosophy, and the entire world, especially at the present, is engrossed in it. The public is concerned with friendly countries and friendly groups, or enemy countries and enemy groups. But as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, a learned person does not make distinctions between enemies and friends. Devotees, especially, do not create friends and enemies. A devotee sees that every living being is part and parcel of Krishna. Mamevangso Jiva, Mamevangso, then it just says Jiva Bhuta. Therefore, a devotee treats friends and enemies equally by trying to educate them both in Krishna consciousness. Of course, the atheistic men do not follow the instructions of pure devotees, but instead consider a devotee their enemy. A devotee, however, never creates a situation of friendship and enmity, although Prahlad Maharaj was obliged to hear the instructions of Shanda and Amarka. He did not like the philosophy of friends and enemies, which forms the basis of politics. He was not interested in this philosophy. Now, it's not exactly a philosophy. It's a whole orientation of false ego and the byproduct of false ego. Aham, and following aham is mama, or mine. False sense of who I am, and consequently a false sense of what is mine. And part of what's mine is that which matches or falls in alignment with I, my self-interest. And to the degree that there's alignment with self-interest, then there's groups. So people may set aside something that's 100% selfish interest and accept the interest of others because it's politically wise to form groups, because there's other groups that have another view, and you don't want to be defeated by the other group. So one sets aside, and it's not just only in competition type of things, it's in other circumstances. Just narrate a little example of this. The God-centered way of life is the teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna is at the center. So supposing Krishna is not at the center, and somebody wants to be peaceful, so they'll create another center and see if other people want to join that other center. And when there's agreement upon the other center, then they have a group. Naturally, two things. There's groups that don't hold that same center, so there's clash. And over a period of time, the center shifts because it's artificial. The first lecture, this is a story I've told many times. The very first lecture I heard Prabhupada speak was on this point. And he gave the example of a pond. Supposing there's a pond in the middle of the floor here, and everybody gets a pebble. And we ask somebody, you throw your pebble into the pond, and what happens? A little splash, and concentric circles go out. And it's very nice. And then somebody, okay, you throw your pebble into the pond. What happens? Same thing. But where the concentric circles clash, then you have a problem, because there's two different centers. And then you take, okay, everybody else, on the count of three, throw your pebble into the pond. And it's turbulence all over the place. And that's material life. So then supposing, you say, okay, we're going to do this again. Everybody get a pebble, but here's the one spot. Place your pebble in this one spot. When you place your pebble in the one spot, there isn't clash, but rather concentric circles amplify one another. That's the God-conscious position. But supposing it's an arbitrary, but it's not in fact a God-conscious position, then what may be agreed upon initially as this is the center, then there's persons within that group that start to have dissent. They don't want that center, they want something different than that center. And that was my experience during the time I was looking at Krishna consciousness. A fashion or trend at the time was people going off and forming groups, like, live off the land groups, with this view or that view or the other view. Communes, it was called, communal living, where everything was shared because there's the group, and the group produces, and nobody owns anything, and it's owned by the group, and then the group distributes. So communes. They didn't last, because after some time, the charismatic leader that had a particular view of what the commune should be like, after some time, even when they were present, what to speak of when they were no longer there would be dissension among the group. It shouldn't be like this, it should be like that, and the commune went up in smoke. I had this experience once, quick, riding in a train from New York to Gitanagari. To go to Gitanagari from New York, the first train goes to Philadelphia. They remove some cars go south, some cars go west, heading towards Pittsburgh. So sitting next to me, a lady got on the train, sat next to me, going to Lewistown, which is near Harrisburg, which is near Gitanagari. So she started conversation, and she wanted to know, are you part of a commune? No, part of an ashram. That's what was her question. And before I got to answer, she said, I was part of an ashram. She was like a talkative type of lady. And so tell me about it. Now, long ago, I joined a commune that was in West Virginia. I thought, oh, maybe it's the Hare Krishna ISKCON place. So where was it? She didn't say Wheeling. She said some other place in West Virginia. So what happened? Well, it was really good for some time, but there was dissension among the group what the purpose of the commune was. And so because of that dissension, I left. And I went to New York and joined an ashram. Didn't ask which one. And, there I learned yoga. Then I became a yoga teacher. And so that's what I've been doing since then. Ashram. And teaching yoga. And she was, she just kept blabbering. She kept talking about, I'm going off to visit my friend over there in, western Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. So I said, would you be interested to know about this commune that I'm going to and why it's still enduring? Yeah, I'd like to hear. She said, because it wasn't arbitrary. The center that brought everyone together was the Supreme. Just like yoga means linking with the Supreme. So the purpose was serving the Supreme. And it's still existing, and it's vibrant, and they do lots of nice things. And one of the main things they do is protection of cows. But, it's a commune of people live together, and it's communal living. And it's still going on because Krishna's at the center. And, went in one ear and out the other ear. Oh, that's very nice. And then she started talking about her friend in Pittsburgh, or north of Pittsburgh. But it's just to illustrate and the sense of cooperation or non-political may be utopian, but is it possible? Well, it's possible if Krishna is at the center, and then when Krishna is at the center, there can still be politics, isn't it? And why is there politics? Because one isn't seeing Krishna at the center, or one is seeing my interest supersedes another's interest. Well, what if one person has a better idea of what's Krishna at the center look like, and another person has a lesser idea of what is Krishna at the center look like? And then there's groups that form around those two opinions or 5 opinions, and you have politics. Therefore, some kind of guidance is needed, where, particularly for ISKCON, our founder Acharya is at the center, and in subsequent generations, it's very important. I could say it 10 times. It's very, 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 very important that we become well acquainted with the teachings of our founder Acharya, because that's at the center. That's at the center. And politics may go on. And over the long haul, that in ISKCON, at least, ISKCON means that Prabhupada's teachings are at the center. And it's important for persons to become conversant in Prabhupada's teaching, because otherwise one might get bewildered and influenced by politics. It happens. I mean, it's the byproduct of the center is lost. So how do you maintain the center? And our founder Acharya's teachings. I'll mention one because it's probably it might not hit suburban Chicago, but if it does, you can be inoculated ahead of time. And if it doesn't, you can at least understand a principle. And currently, there's a controversy. There's more than one, but the one controversy is in relation to Prabhupada's teachings, which are resting upon Bhaktisiddhanta's teachings, which are resting upon Bhaktivinoda's teachings. And there's a group of people that have a different idea about Prabhupada's teachings, that are rooted in Bhaktisiddhanta's teachings and rooted in Bhaktivinoda's teachings. And that is that Bhaktivinoda Thakur propounded a fiction. And it was well intended, because he wanted to broadly expand Krishna consciousness, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the teachings of Jiva Goswami, Rupa and Jiva Goswami, and he was well learned, and so he created a fiction. And, it's pretty innocuous, but the fiction that he created, that some persons are taking exception to, is that bhakti is inherent in the jiva. Like, it's so fundamental to our followers of Prabhupada that how can you question? But they question. And the question is resting upon a lens through which the writings of Jiva Goswami are expressed. And thus they say, Bhakti Vinod Thakur certainly knew what the teachings of Jiva Goswami were, but during his particular time, he had a particular audience, the Bhadralok, and he had to take, by design, he created a fiction, which is different than Jiva Goswami's teachings, which is different than Lord Chaitanya's teachings, based upon this argument, that argument, that argument, the other argument. And so the fiction was the bhakti is inherent in the jiva. And second is that fiction is no longer needed. The language is, but it has a shelf life. Now let's replace that fiction with what the teachings of Jiva Goswami are, which is the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which is our teachings, our Gaudiya line. And bhakti isn't inherent in the jiva, but it's inherited. So there's a book, and the person is going around and giving seminars on his book on Bhaktivinoda Thakur created a fiction. Now, I don't know if he'll come out here, but if he comes out here, you'll know ahead of time. It's on your radar screen. And so there's another person who is doing his PhD at Oxford University on this topic because he's very concerned that, the persons on that view, they want to protect the Siddhanta and, cover for Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who created this fiction, because it was a strategy to help Bhadralok and people of his time, influenced by European teachings, to understand how bhakti is inherent. Although, according to their view, that's not what Jiva Goswami says. This other person has taken on the task of where the root of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teaching is the great acharyas, starting with Jiva Goswami. Starting with Jiva Goswami, because he was so prolific. And particularly, the tattva of the jiva is elaborately discussed, a whole big section in Paramatma Sandarbha. The tattva of the jiva is mentioned, described, detailed elaborately in Paramatma Sandarbha. There's a certain section. And to describe that section, Jiva Goswami makes reference to a particular acharya a few generations after Ramanujacharya from the Sri Sampradaya. Now, in the Sandarbhas, Jiva Goswami writes that the research, the foundation, the document, the rough draft document of all 6 Sandarbhas came from Gopal Bhatta. And Gopal Bhatta handed them over to Jiva Goswami and asked him to refine it, organize it, and not mention his name. He liked serving from the background. Gopal Bhatta met Lord Chaitanya. He was in the service of Lord Chaitanya when he was 6 years old in Srirangam for 4 months. And he stayed in Srirangam from 6 years old until he was 30. So the prime of his youth was in Srirangam. And what did he do? He did what young Brahmin boys do who are followers of Lord Chaitanya. He learned deity worship, and he compiled instructions of deity worship consistent with the scriptures as well as the mood of Lord Chaitanya, and he compiled elaborate notes on the essential teachings of the scriptures, particularly Srimad Bhagavatam, because it was so favored by Lord Chaitanya. And on this topic of the nature of the jiva, he specifically relied upon, Gopal Bhatta relied upon Geometry Muni. Geometry Muni was not so well known, perhaps, by those of us who are outside of Sri Vaishnavism, but he, Geometry Muni, is a celebrated personality in the Sri Vaishnava tradition. And he and Vedanta Deshika, many devotees know that name, Vedanta Deshika was a celebrated acharya in the Sri Vaishnava tradition, and they differed on this topic. Both followers, Narayana is supreme, etc., but they differed on this topic. And later, their difference on this topic resulted in the schism in Sri Vaishnava tradition, the northern group and the southern group. They have their names in Sanskrit over this issue. So I'm inoculating you because I want to make sure there's some understanding that doesn't result in a schism. And that's why this devotee is doing his PhD work on this topic. So because Gopal Bhatta was very familiar with Geometry Muni, he mentions it. Gopal Bhatta mentions it, and then Jiva Goswami mentions him by name. And according to the writings of Geometry Muni, there are 21 attributes of a jiva. The 21 attribute is Sheshatva, which means the tvam means the attribute of, or the quality of, or somethingness. Tvam. It's a Sanskrit technical construct, suffix. Shesha indicates service. Sheshatvam is having the quality of service, which in its mature stage, it certainly means bhakti. In the mature stage, it's prema. It's inherent in the jiva. And so this devotee that's doing this research found that document in Tamil, because Geometry Muni wrote in Tamil. And that's the same language that Gopal Bhatta received to base his notes that formed that section of Paramatma Sandarbha, which then Jiva Goswami wrote, which then in turn Bhaktivinoda Thakur makes similar mention in his writings to Geometry Muni. In other words, in short, the root source of bhakti is inherent in the jiva is Geometry Muni, from whom Gopal Bhatta drew that section of Paramatma Sandarbha, which Jiva Goswami fleshed out, and which Bhaktivinoda Thakur certainly knew, and he expanded. And it wasn't a fiction created for some strategic reason. was a fiction that was a strategy because it helped him spread bhakti. So he just said something that was a fiction. That's what this other group says. And it's had its shelf life, so let's put the shelf life fiction to rest, and here's the real deal. Into something other. Bhakti isn't inherent to the jiva. So it takes a scholar. He's just done his first 1 year, year and a half of a 6-year PhD program, but it'll be thoroughly researched. We can count on it, and it's there to protect the Siddhanta. But if one's faith may be shaken, if this literature goes out and becomes popular, that because Prabhupada followed Bhaktisiddhanta, who followed Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who followed Jiva Goswami, who followed Gopal Bhatta and Geometry Muni, and the teaching is what it is. And there's 100% symmetry. But it depends on the lens through which you look at. Therefore, faith in this, back to the text here, faith in Yudhisthira Maharaj, in Narada Muni, is essential, because he was asking from the right person, something that's hard to understand. We have to inquire from the right persons to have the lens through which to see something that may be hard to understand. And if we don't understand it and the brain gets befuddled, that's okay. This is Prabhupada's explanation about nectar devotion, or any scripture. If there's something that you read and you don't understand what to do, read it again. And if you don't understand after reading it again, you read it again. And if you don't understand after reading again, you continue reading it again and again. And because the cloud of Maya can be removed by spiritual sound, then one can start to understand what it says. But without intrinsic faith, then it becomes the Kanishta position where one's faith is soft and pliable. And one comes along and hears something else, and then, wait a minute, maybe something else is true instead of the teaching that I'm consistently hearing. So devotees, Rupa Goswami taught us this. We don't. It's not. It's not the position of a Vaishnav to engage in debate. There was a time in history where amongst Brahmanas debate was like a big thing. And even Lord Chaitanya, in his own way, accepted the opportunity to engage with Keshava Kashmiri. But it wasn't really a debate. He was just illuminating his intelligence. We don't do debate. So if somebody comes along with another idea that says something wild, which, it's not, there's no guarantee it's going to happen. At least here in the Chicago area. But this person is traveling around with his new book that says Bhakti Vinod Thakur created a fiction. And here's the real deal. He's not criticizing. His intention is, let us protect the Siddhanta and let us protect the good name of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, because some people out there that are not Vaishnavas or Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they criticize out there. There's people out there that don't like this or don't like that or don't like the other thing. And so he wants to protect the good name of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So there's landmines out there. And because that's the question here. How is it possible that a father, who he had affection twice, at least explicitly, with tears in his eyes, placed his son in his lap and patted him, and then the next moment he's ready to kill him. Like, please explain. This is difficult to understand. So when things are difficult to understand, I mean, the same thing that Canto 7 starts on the same note. And this is part of an example explaining what comes at the first part of Canto 7, which is, how did Shishupal get liberation? He was a bad guy. He was inimical to Krishna and he got liberation. How's that? I can't understand. Because great personalities may try for lifetimes and they don't achieve liberation, and he's a bad guy. And just like that, kaboom, we saw it. His soul merged with Krishna. How'd that happen? Please explain. So that opens the door for the theology of the importance of chanting the holy name, even in scorn and derision. It's so powerful. He became purified by saying Krishna's name over and over. And then Krishna gave him liberation. Cleansed him of the ill regard for Krishna. And there was another purpose, of course, bringing him back to the gates of Vaikuntha as Jai. There are things that are mysterious, and mysteries, best to understand mysteries in this method of disciplic succession from a qualified person. And it's not that a qualified person has to be an encyclopedia, that they know everything about everything. And there's nothing they don't know because they've got to know everything about everything, including minutiae and how many grains of sand there are in the Sahara Desert, or things like that. Because sometimes people ask that. Some persons ask that of Prabhupada. It's said their spiritual master becomes the knower of all things. How many windows are there in the Empire State Building? Prabhupada's answer. How many drops of water are there in a mirage? Just like that. So minutiae and trivia and remote details are not essential, but as essential is essential. And then in time, the unfolding of the hearing and chanting process, things become more clear. Like, I had no idea that this was even an issue before I heard the two parties saying what they were saying. Had no idea. But there are people out there that have that idea. And they, say not nice things about Bhakti Vinod. And, it goes on. So how do you address faithless persons? If you're in the Kanishta position, your faith may be damaged. If you're in the Madhyama position, depending on what stage of Madhyama, your faith may not be damaged, but you may not be able to answer all questions. And the Uttama position is that the faith is fixed. And it can't waver. And at least in course of time, things that are important can be realized by such a person. There's a nice example of this, the intensity of inquisitiveness of Baladev Vidyabhusan. It's a nice story. I'll end with this. Baladev, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was residing in Radhakund in Vrindavan, and he was reading Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Chaitanya Charitamrita. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was a generation or two after Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, so he was reading. and he read something in Chaitanya Charitamrita about the mantra, the mantra that was worshipped by Lord Brahma had 24 and a half syllables. And he never heard of that before. 24 and a half syllables. And he prayed and he studied and he thised and he thated and he couldn't get an answer. But he was intensely inquiring. And then on the spiritual platform, he decided, if I can't receive an understanding of what Krishnadas Kaviraj, he wasn't doubting Krishnadas Kaviraj. He was feeling, I'm not qualified to understand Krishnadas Kaviraj. So what's the use of my existence? Pretty intense. So he decided he would just fast till death by the side of Radhakund. And as he was fasting, one evening he dozed, fell asleep, and Radharani appeared in his dream, in his vision, and she explained where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami derived half a syllable. When a certain conjunction of this and that are together, then it becomes a half a syllable. And you'll find it in the library in such and such dictionary, Sanskrit dictionary. So please be peaceful and don't give up your life. He was very happy in the morning when he woke up and went to the library, and there it was. Oh, and she also said, I will give you instruction on the meaning of Gayatri Mantra, and you can please write a commentary according to the meaning on Gayatri Mantra that I give you. So he what was one of his books, Commentary on Gayatri Mantra. But that was the fruit of this inquisitiveness. Now, it doesn't mean, therefore, all of us, if we don't understand something, should be ready to fast until death. That's not the application. The application is being eager at the same time. Patient, because without patience, you're not going to be successful in spiritual life. Utsaha nishchaya dharyat. That which we don't know, continue reading, and good chance the thing that you don't know, it'll pop out of the page. Not always like that, but very often like that. If you have an inquisitive mind and you wish to know, and you're faithful, then the answer will come or may come, at least in time. So that's a little response to Yudhisthira wanting to know from Narada, how did this very mysterious thing happen? Let's see if there's some discussion.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much. Maharaj, please forgive me because I'm trying to frame the question as I'm thinking about it. I came across this very recently, the idea that thank God that I think. And related to that idea was also an idea that if everybody is thinking same, then nobody is thinking enough. And so my question with what you said in last part of the class was, where can I draw a line that, okay, I don't have to think beyond this, because when this was shared earlier that bhakti is not inherent to jiva, this idea itself was so revolutionary that I could never even think of this. But now somebody has thought this, and so it is out there. And so the question is, if somebody is thinking, somebody else can think something else. So as a devotee, as a Kanishta devotee maybe, how can I draw that line that I don't have to think beyond this?
Well, the premise of your question is, if all people are thinking the same, they're not thinking enough. That's called the platform of being a mental speculator, a Muni. The nature of a Muni is agitate the mind to come up with something. And to be a certified Muni, it has to be something that others haven't come up with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not a Muni. If you're thinking like everyone else is, you're not a Muni. But if you're speculating enough, then you'll be a Muni, because you're coming up with something that other people haven't come up with. And that's on the material side, of course. But because Vaishnavas are also thoughtful. But the premise of your question leads to a mistaken direction in life. The proper direction in life is, you're an individual, and your experience of Krishna is unique. Your experience of reality is unique, and that's enough. How you experience the Mahamantra, it's unique. How you experience globulins, it's unique. It may be something like somebody else, but it's unique. And you don't need to go beyond that. The premise of your question is resting upon mental speculation. You're not speculating enough unless you come up with different ideas. We don't do that. We're individual. We acknowledge our and others' individuality. That's what we do. Does that address your question?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So like you mentioned, Maharaj, that our experiences of Krishna's reciprocation or Krishna are unique. So in my case, I'm asking, like, suppose I feel like content or happy that, okay, there is enough reciprocation from Krishna. It's just that I am not sufficiently serving, but I'm striving for that. But so if one can live in that kind of little bit contentment, will it be like a la la land, or do we need to like these kind of discussions? It's way beyond my capacity to even fathom these discussions. So I'm feeling that do we even need to go there, or we can just stay content in our relationship with Krishna?
Well, you're throwing out several things, not just one thing. Contentment, yes. Complacency, no. Contentment doesn't mean complacency. It doesn't mean there's nothing further for me to know, there's nothing further for me to do, there's nothing further for me to experience in my relationship with Krishna. That's never good idea. Feeling, on the material side, feeling empty is different than the transcendental side of feeling inadequate, or a sense of insufficiency. Let's take a look at very, very, very advanced devotees, and that's how they feel. And when they feel that way, it's not like they're now frozen. They're continuing to serve to their capacity, and always aspiring for further. So, in other words, don't stagnate, but at the same time be satisfied in your relationship with Krishna. But don't stagnate. Don't become complacent. Go further. Is there a limit? Spiritual life is dynamic, not static. So again, the frame of your question is a little misplaced. If there are things that are beyond your capacity to understand, that's quite okay. There's lots of things beyond our capacity, mine, yours, and every one of us capacity to understand. So many things revealed by our acharyas. Like here's one, the nature of love in Vrindavan. That's fully transcendental. We're not fully transcendental, so we can admire it, like admire something. I admire the season spring. It's really just awesome. But can I fathom it? Oh. And there are things of the kind of love that is going on eternally in Krishna's Braja Dham is otherworldly, but it's very attractive, and it's something to hear about, and so let that be what you do when you come across something that you can't fathom, or it's beyond your little capacity. Just hear it faithfully, knowing that hearing is going to nurture both the cleansing and the lifting. So complacency is not there, and satisfaction doesn't mean complacency. Go ahead, say your second one. Go ahead.
So, Maharaj, these kind of discussions, do they go into Jnana side?
Yeah. They go in that direction. However, when just like our acharyas, besides this current topic I brought up, our acharyas go into these topics, and it's not gyan. It's glorification of Krishna. It's bhakti. Bhakti that's powered by very elevated, pure consciousness and pure intelligence, and they're just displaying those in their writings. There's a distinction. Okay.
Last question.
Okay.
So, like in the beginning of this chapter, Maharaj, we read that Prahlad Maharaj didn't obey his teachers, and kind of sometimes he was like telling them what is right. So, I mean, like by worldly standards, this is not proper.
Yes and no. Because his real teacher was not those two.
Yeah.
His father wanted those two. So it's not improper. He's representing Narada. He recited what they wanted him to recite. But he also expressed, who knows how and the circumstance, etc. But he expressed, this is the us and them consciousness. Because that's what they were teaching.
So even if they're at the teacher's position or older, still if it is Krishna...
well, it depends on how you say what you say. He wasn't disrespectful.
Right. Yeah.
But he was Prahlad. We're not Prahlad. But he's not violating Vaishnava etiquette.
Right. Got it. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I want to know how one can develop faith.
How to develop faith?
Yes, and if somebody is not having the knowledge of scriptures, so can that person still develop faith for Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna?
Sure. The answer to the second part is faith is of the soul. Covered. covered in degrees, but faith is of the soul. It's intrinsic to the soul. So there's divisions of faith according to the modes of nature, but the faith is there. So can someone develop faith that doesn't have faith in the scripture? By association, by those that are faithful to transcendence, one can, that's inherent in the soul, it can be awakened. The modes will have to shift, but it can happen. It can happen slowly, in between, or quickly, just by association. And how to develop faith? That's a classic question. I recall in the last 3 weeks answering that question about 6 times. Because it's an important question. You can hear those recordings, but associating with those that are faithful is how, and acting in knowledge. When you hear something from those that are faithful and it resonates, you do that. And let me see what happens by doing that. When you act in knowledge, you get a realization. And when you get a realization, it nourishes faith. So you go back to that source, then you hear again with more faith. Then you hear something you didn't hear the first time. Then it resonates, and so you act on that knowledge. And it gives realization. So faith is nourished by association and having proper regard for qualified persons who can give transcendental knowledge. And then applying it. Then faith will grow naturally.
So you mean to say if I have more association with the realized people?
It's not more.
Yeah.
It's not quantitative.
Okay.
Qualitative. And association is primarily through sound.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Okay.
I have one more question, Guru Maharaj.
Okay.
So when I hear about Lord Narsimdev, so I hear 3 names associated with him: Ugra Narsim, Prahlad Narsim, and Lakshmi Narasim. So are they all different forms, or is just the different names for him?
There's modes.
Mm-hmm.
And even there's subdivisions of those. And further divisions in those 3s. But it's just the mood. So as he exhibits a mood, then there's a name, just like names of Krishna. There's so many names of Krishna based upon his mood and his service and his relationships with people and his devotees. And the demons, and there's names. There's so many names. So it's more than 3 names, and it's not different form. It's just a different mood.
So I've seen mostly we worship Ugra Narsim, especially in Mayapur, and I have worshipped New Vrindavan.
New Vrindavan is not Ugra Nrsimha.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So which mood should we worship? Is there any preference that we should do? Or
Where your heart goes, that's where you should.
Okay. Thank you, Guru Maharaj. And thank you for answering my question from the other day about different pastimes of Narsimdev, apart from Prahlad Maharaj.
The Chicago, I gave to through Subal, who gave it to the MC, who is supposed to circulate this link that has 84 pages of pastimes, including the one that you mentioned.
Sure.
The South Africa one.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'm going to be discussing it in the next couple of days.
So Maharaji, thank you for the satsang. I was just hearing Prabhuji what he was talking about, the mind thinking about different things and to what extent should the mind think. So isn't the mind like in the 5 layers of bodies we have, isn't the mind layer the Maya, which is kind of separating us from
Not necessarily. If mind is directed to Krishna, then it's purified. Manmana. Mangatena antaratmana.
Yeah, if it is directed to Krishna, which means that it's aligned with the spirit soul, then it is okay. But if the mind is thinking of different things, isn't it the Maya which separates us from the super soul to us?
Always. And it's not just the mind is aligned with the spirit soul, the mind is aligned with the Supreme Soul. Then by that process, the coverings of the mind become removed and the mind becomes spiritualized fully. And then it's the spiritual mind acting instead of the material one. So it's all a question of where consciousness is centered. Krishna or not Krishna is absent.
Yeah, because most of the times, like if you are talking to people who are not into this, is like, I guess the mind is doing so much of...
Oh, yeah. It's Maya.
So that's the Maya, isn't
That's
it?
Maya is covering, and the covering looks like this, or looks like that. It keeps changing, because Maya is very versatile.
Yeah, so shouldn't be reminded of that the mind is Maya, so you have to basically go...
Well, the
within.
mind isn't Maya. Mind, the deluding potency influences the mind. That they're separate entities. And the mind isn't necessarily Maya. The mind is of the soul. The soul has mind also. But that faculty, the mind faculty, it is a covering, and in the covered state, Krishna is not there, or at least appears to be absent. And therefore, people that are speculators will often conclude there is no God. And this and that and the other is how they get to that place. Or the starting place is there's no God, and this and that and the other confirms. Okay, he has a question. Shivram?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Sorry. I have a couple of comments and questions. One is that, first of all, I want to thank you for the particular example you gave with respect to Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I'm very grateful to you for bringing that. I have no idea it's such a thing existed.
It's fine that you had no idea, and fine you just leave it like that.
But I'm very grateful to you for bringing that out. So that's one thing I want to mention. Couple of other things is that you mentioned that the center for our movement is that Srila Prabhupada is at the center, and we have to learn the teachings of Profounder Acharya. So one comment or maybe question is, the person and the teachings are not to be differentiated in Krishna consciousness. So that's one comment. And then the other is that we also hear that center is Krishna, and we are saying Prabhupada is at the center. So is there any spiritual, like something we can quote from scripture to show that these two are aligned? So that's one question.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Is there something in Scripture that says that these two are aligned?
Yeah, so Krishna is at the center. That he's very...
Real Guru is one who is simply the message carrier. And that's the alignment.
Okay. So that's the spiritual, that's the source of the...
That's the principle.
Okay.
The postal peon.
Mm-hmm.
They just deliver letters. They don't edit letters. They just deliver. So Krishna's message is this, and they give Krishna's message. That's the alignment.
Okay. And another question I have is, or maybe a comment also, but I would like to invite your thoughts here, that two God brothers or God sisters, or whoever, they may differ in how to serve Krishna, and that's all right according
It's wholesome.
to... Sorry?
It's wholesome.
It's wholesome.
Not only it's all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then on the other hand, we don't want to engage in a debate with someone else. So maybe there's an apparent contradiction here. Or
Why? You're married. Is there an inherent contradiction? There's love and trust. There's give and take.
Mm-hmm.
And so you expand it in the principle. Next.
I didn't quite catch the spelling of Jayamitri Muni.
Geometry. It sounds like the arithmetic geometry. It's not spelled like that. But you can look it up. I can look it up for you, or you can look it up.
I have no idea how to look it up, honestly. So if you could.
So it's a curiosity item only.
Yes. Any comments also on this aspect of the person and the teachings are not to be differentiated with respect to the center of our Hare Krishna movement is Srila Prabhupada?
It's Prabhupada. And no, Prabhupada is not separate from that line that he represents, but ISKCON is Prabhupada. And that's it. We can be respectful of others that are not Prabhupada aligned. We can be respectful of others that are not Prabhupada aligned. And we're Prabhupada aligned.
Yeah. Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.